There is a moment in every avoidant person's emotional world that almost nobody notices while it is happening, and it is not dramatic, it is not loud, and it does not look like the movies or the stories people are used to believing about love. It happens quietly, almost invisibly, and most people miss it because they are watching for grand gestures, constant communication, or overwhelming emotional expression. But avoidants are wired differently. They do not fall in love through closeness first. They fall in love through a shift that happens inside them long before they are ready to admit it, sometimes even to themselves. And here is the truth that changes everything. Once an avoidant does this one specific thing, they have already crossed a line they cannot uncross. Their emotional system has already attached to you, even if their behavior still looks confusing, distant, or inconsistent on the outside. The hardest part is that most people misread this moment completely. They either push too hard, demand clarity too quickly, or assume the avoidant does not care, when in reality the avoidant is already fighting one of the biggest internal battles of their life. Because love for someone with avoidant attachment does not feel like comfort at first. It feels like risk. It feels like losing control. It feels like standing on emotional ground that suddenly does not feel stable anymore. And if you have ever been close to someone like this, you know exactly how confusing that contradiction can feel. One moment they are warm, present, deeply connected, and the next moment they seem distant, overwhelmed, or unreachable. It can feel like emotional whiplash, leaving you questioning your worth, your importance, and sometimes even your reality. But what most people never understand is that avoidants are not running from love. The way people assume, they are running from what love represents to their nervous system. To them, love has historically meant pressure, expectations, loss of independence, or emotional experiences they were never taught how to safely process. So instead of learning that love equals safety, they learned that love equals vulnerability without protection. And vulnerability, to an avoidant, can feel terrifying. Avoidants are often misunderstood because they appear strong, independent, self-sufficient, and emotionally composed. They are usually the ones who seem like they have everything under control. They do not easily rely on others. They do not openly express emotional needs. They pride themselves on being able to handle life alone. But this independence is not always confidence. Many times it is armor. It is a survival strategy built over years of learning that depending on others leads to disappointment, rejection, or emotional overwhelm. Deep down, avoidants often carry a quiet belief that if they allow themselves to need someone, they will lose themselves in the process. That belief becomes the foundation of their fear of love. Not fear of you as a person, not fear of connection itself, but fear of what connection might demand from them emotionally. When closeness starts growing, their subconscious alarm system activates. It tells them they are entering dangerous territory. It tells them they must slow down, create space, or regain emotional control. And here is where things become deeply misunderstood. Most people believe avoidants fear losing others. In reality, avoidants often fear losing themselves far more than they fear losing a relationship. Losing someone hurts, but losing their emotional independence feels like losing their identity. That fear is powerful enough to make them suppress feelings, delay commitment, or distance themselves even when they genuinely care. There is a critical turning point in their emotional journey that almost no one talks about. Avoidants can date someone, spend time with them, share experiences, and even feel attraction or comfort without truly forming deep emotional attachment. They can stay in relationships that feel safe, enjoyable, and even meaningful without allowing themselves to emotionally depend on the other person. For them, connection can exist without vulnerability for a long time. They can keep part of themselves protected behind invisible walls, maintaining emotional distance while still participating in the relationship. That is why many people feel confused after spending months or years with an avoidant partner, wondering why the connection never deepened emotionally. The reason is simple but painful. Comfort is not the same as emotional bonding for an avoidant. They can enjoy someone's presence, admire them, respect them, and even care about them without allowing that care to reach the level where it threatens their emotional independence. They stay in control of their internal world, carefully managing how much of themselves they reveal or invest. As long as they can maintain that balance, they feel safe enough to stay. But when that balance begins to shift, something inside them starts changing in ways they cannot easily reverse. The moment avoidance begins turning into real attachment does not happen when they spend more time with you or when the relationship becomes more stable on the surface. It happens when distance stops giving them relief. Distance is an avoidant's primary emotional coping strategy. When they feel overwhelmed, they withdraw. When emotions intensify, they create space. When vulnerability increases, they retreat internally or physically to regulate themselves. Distance gives them control. Distance gives them safety. Distance allows them to reset their emotional system. But when an avoidant starts falling in love, something unexpected begins to happen. Distance no longer brings the same comfort it used to. Instead of feeling relief when they step back, they begin feeling restless. Instead of regaining control through emotional separation, they begin noticing that the absence of the person they are attached to creates a different type of discomfort. This is the beginning of real attachment forming beneath their awareness. It is subtle, it is quiet, and it is incredibly significant, because when distance stops feeling like safety and starts feeling like loss, their emotional system has already crossed into deeper connection. They may not understand it, they may resist it, they may even react against it. But internally, their nervous system has started linking emotional regulation to the presence of another person. That is not something avoidants allow easily. And once it happens, it changes their internal world permanently. There is one specific behavioral shift that reveals this transformation, and most people overlook it because it does not look dramatic or romantic on the surface. The shift begins when the avoidant unconsciously starts emotionally regulating themselves through you instead of away from you. In the past, when stress, fear, or emotional intensity appeared, they would withdraw to manage it alone. They would distract themselves, isolate emotionally, or focus on independence to regain balance. But when they begin falling in love, they start staying present during emotional discomfort, even when it feels unnatural to them. They may not openly say they need you, they may not verbally express vulnerability, but they begin allowing your presence, your energy, or your emotional stability to calm their internal chaos. Sometimes this shows up in small ways, like reaching out during stressful moments, staying in conversations that feel emotionally deep instead of shutting down, or choosing to remain connected after conflict instead of disappearing. These moments might seem ordinary to someone with secure attachment, but for an avoidant, they represent a massive internal shift. It means their nervous system is beginning to associate closeness with regulation instead of danger. And once that association forms, love has already taken root. What makes this shift so complex is that it often triggers fear. At the exact same time, it triggers attachment. Avoidants are not unaware of their emotional changes. On some level, they sense that they are becoming emotionally dependent in ways they cannot fully control. That realization can feel terrifying. They may worry that they are losing their independence. They may fear being hurt or rejected if they allow themselves to fully attach. They may even question whether they are capable of sustaining emotional closeness long-term. This internal conflict creates the push-pull dynamic that so many people experience with avoidant partners. One part of them wants to stay close because closeness is starting to feel emotionally grounding. Another part of them wants to retreat because vulnerability feels overwhelming. Both impulses exist simultaneously, creating confusion not only for their partner, but also for themselves. Many avoidants do not understand why they feel drawn to someone while also feeling the urge to escape from the same connection. It can feel like losing control over emotions they have spent their entire life trying to manage carefully. This is why avoidants can sometimes remain in relationships for long periods without truly falling in love, and then suddenly experience emotional intensity that seems disproportionate or confusing. The difference is not time. It is emotional risk. Avoidance can stay in comfortable, low vulnerability connections indefinitely because those relationships do not challenge their survival strategies. But when they meet someone who makes them feel emotionally seen, emotionally safe, or emotionally grounded in a way they cannot replicate alone, their defenses begin weakening. They may still resist it. They may still create but internally, their emotional system has already started reorganizing around the connection, and that is the moment most people never recognize. They assume love begins when avoidants openly express feelings or commit verbally. In reality, love often begins much earlier, during the quiet internal shift when avoidants stop being able to fully regulate their emotions without the presence of the person they are attaching to. Understanding this changes the entire way people interpret avoidant behavior. It explains why avoidance can appear calm, controlled, and emotionally reserved on the surface while experiencing intense emotional attachment underneath. It explains why they sometimes withdraw after moments of deep connection. It explains why they struggle to communicate feelings they are still trying to understand themselves. Most importantly, it reveals that love for avoidance is not proven through dramatic emotional expression, but through subtle changes in how they manage vulnerability. When they begin choosing connection during discomfort instead of distance, they have already stepped into emotional territory they once spent their life avoiding. And that step, no matter how small it appears externally, represents one of the most significant emotional risks they can take. Once this internal shift happens, everything about the connection begins to operate on a deeper emotional level, even if nothing obvious has changed on the outside. This is where many people get stuck, because they mistake surface behavior for emotional truth. They look for constant reassurance, consistent communication, or overt emotional expression as proof of love. But avoidants do not show love the same way. The real difference between comfort and emotional bonding lies in where the avoidant places emotional risk. Comfort means the relationship fits neatly into their life without threatening their independence. Emotional bonding means the relationship begins to influence how they feel about themselves, their stability, and their sense of control. Comfort allows them to walk away without emotional consequence. Emotional bonding does not. Once emotional bonding begins, the idea of losing the connection creates internal disturbance, even if they try to suppress it. This is why avoidance can appear emotionally detached, while simultaneously being deeply affected by the presence or absence of one specific person. The bond is not visible yet, but it is active beneath the surface, quietly shaping their emotional responses in ways they are not fully conscious of. At this stage, something subtle but powerful begins to emerge. The avoidant starts noticing emotional reactions they did not plan for. They may feel unsettled when communication drops. They may think about you during moments of stress or uncertainty. They may feel an urge to share something personal and then immediately feel conflicted about it. These reactions can feel foreign and uncomfortable because they disrupt the avoidant's usual emotional equilibrium. For most of their life, they have relied on emotional self-sufficiency. They learn to manage feelings internally without depending on anyone else. Now, without intending to, their emotional system has begun factoring another person into its regulation process. This does not mean they suddenly feel secure or confident in love. In fact, it often means the opposite. The deeper the attachment grows, the more their defenses activate. This is not because they do not care, but because they care more than they know how to handle. Emotional bonding introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty threatens their sense of control. There is a very specific moment that marks the point of no return for avoidance, and it often happens quietly during emotional discomfort rather than during happiness. It happens when they are overwhelmed, stressed, or emotionally activated, and instead of withdrawing completely, they stay mentally connected to you. They might replay your words in their mind. They might feel calmer simply knowing you are there, even if they do not reach out. They might delay pulling away because something inside them wants to remain connected, despite the discomfort. This is the subtle shift they cannot fake. Anyone can show interest when things are easy. Anyone can enjoy companionship when there is no emotional risk. But staying emotionally tethered during discomfort is something avoidants only do once attachment has already formed. This is when love begins operating beneath their conscious awareness, and this is also when fear intensifies. As control begins slipping from their hands, avoidants often experience an internal alarm they cannot silence. They may feel emotionally exposed even if nothing dramatic has happened. They may suddenly become hyper-aware of their feelings, questioning whether they are becoming too attached. They may worry about what the connection means, where it is going, and what it might demand from them. This loss of control is deeply unsettling, because avoidants equate emotional regulation with safety. When they realize that their emotional state is being influenced by someone else, it can feel like losing emotional autonomy. This is not something they are prepared for, and it can trigger behaviors that seem contradictory. They might become distant after moments of closeness. They might act indifferent after showing vulnerability. They might minimize the importance of the connection verbally, while feeling deeply impacted internally. These behaviors are not manipulative tactics. They are attempts to regain emotional balance in a system that suddenly feels unstable. The truth is, avoidants fall in love at the exact moment they realize they cannot fully detach without emotional consequence. Love begins when walking away no longer feels neutral, when silence feels heavier than it used to, when distance creates anxiety instead of relief, when emotional withdrawal no longer restores their sense of control. This is the moment that changes everything, even if they never articulate it. At this point, their emotional world has expanded to include someone else in a way that cannot be undone. They may still struggle to communicate it. They may still resist committing to it, but internally, attachment has already taken hold. This is why avoidants sometimes appear calm while making decisions that seem confusing or contradictory. They are trying to reconcile their desire for emotional safety with the reality that safety is no longer found in isolation. What terrifies them most about this stage is not rejection, but exposure. Love requires presence. It requires being seen emotionally. It requires allowing someone else access to parts of the self that were once carefully protected. For avoidance, this can feel like standing without armor. Even if the connection feels good, even if the person feels safe, the vulnerability itself is unfamiliar territory. Their nervous system has learned to associate vulnerability with potential harm, not comfort. So when love begins, fear is not far behind. They may worry that if they allow themselves to fully attach, they will lose their independence, their identity, or their ability to cope alone. This fear can coexist with genuine affection, creating emotional tension that is difficult for them to explain. Inside the avoidant, an internal war begins. One part of them wants to stay connected because the bond feels grounding in ways they never experienced before. Another part of them wants to retreat because the intensity feels overwhelming. They may oscillate between closeness and distance, not because they enjoy the power dynamic, but because they are trying to find equilibrium between two competing emotional needs. They want connection, but they also want safety. Unfortunately, their definition of safety has always been tied to emotional distance. Love challenges that definition. It asks them to redefine safety as something that can exist within closeness, rather than outside of it. That is not an easy shift to make, especially without awareness or emotional tools. This is why avoidance may pull away right after moments of deep connection. From the outside, it can feel like rejection or emotional inconsistency. From the inside, it feels like emotional overload. They may need space, not because they stopped caring, but because they care more than they expected. Their nervous system is trying to recalibrate. They are attempting to integrate new emotional experiences into an old survival framework that was never designed to handle this level of attachment. When they withdraw, it is often an unconscious attempt to regain emotional stability, not a conscious decision to hurt or manipulate. This distinction matters deeply, especially for those who internalize the avoidance behavior as a reflection of their own worth. The exact moment they have fallen in love is not when they say it, not when they commit, and not when they behave perfectly. It is when they emotionally anchor themselves to you during moments of vulnerability, even if they resist it. When your presence, your voice, or your emotional steadiness becomes part of how they calm themselves. When your absence creates emotional disturbance instead of peace. When they begin factoring you into their emotional decisions without realizing it, that is the line they cross silently. And once crossed, their internal world is no longer the same. They may still struggle, they may still fear intimacy, but love, real attachment, has already entered the equation. If you have ever felt confused by an avoidance mixed signals, this understanding changes the narrative. It shifts the focus away from chasing validation and toward recognizing emotional truth beneath behavior. It reminds you that love does not always look loud or obvious, especially for those who learn to survive without emotional support. It also reminds you that someone's fear response does not invalidate the connection that exists. At the same time, it does not mean you should abandon your boundaries or emotional needs. Recognizing attachment is not the same as excusing emotional unavailability, but it does offer clarity. It explains why avoidance can love deeply while struggling to stay present consistently. It explains why their fear often intensifies right when the bond becomes real. And it explains why the moment they emotionally regulate through you instead of away from you is the moment love has already taken root, whether they are ready to face it or not. Once this internal attachment is active, the avoidant enters a phase they almost never talk about, even with people closest to them. From the outside, it may look like confusion or inconsistency, but internally it feels like an emotional tug-of-war that never fully quiets down. This is the internal war they carry silently. On one side is the part of them that has learned to survive by staying self-contained, emotionally independent, and in control. On the other side is a growing emotional bond that keeps pulling their attention back to you, even when they try to suppress it. They may wake up thinking about you without wanting to. They may feel emotionally impacted by your mood or your distance, even while telling themselves it should not matter. This loss of emotional neutrality is deeply unsettling for someone who built their identity around not needing anyone. They may feel frustrated with themselves, wondering why they cannot simply detach the way they used to. They may even feel ashamed of needing reassurance, connection, or emotional closeness, because those needs conflict with the version of themselves they believe they must maintain to feel safe. This internal conflict creates a lot of silent emotional labor. Avoidants often spend a great deal of energy trying to rationalize their feelings away. They tell themselves they are overthinking. They downplay the importance of the connection. They focus on flaws, distance, or reasons why it might not work. Not because they genuinely believe those reasons, but because detachment feels like relief when emotional intensity becomes too strong. Yet even as they attempt to detach mentally, their emotional system remains tethered. This dissonance can be exhausting. It can leave them feeling emotionally drained without understanding why. They may appear distant or withdrawn, but inside they are processing far more than they are expressing. This is why avoidants often struggle to explain what they are feeling. They are not hiding emotions intentionally. They are trying to make sense of emotions that contradict their lifelong coping strategies. At this stage, many avoidants begin pulling away right after moments of closeness, and this is one of the most painful experiences for the person on the receiving end. The closeness feels real. The connection feels deep. Then suddenly, the energy shifts. Communication slows. Emotional availability decreases. From the outside, it can feel like rejection or abandonment. From the inside, it feels like emotional overload. When closeness reaches a certain intensity, the avoidance nervous system interprets it as a loss of safety. Their body responds before their mind can catch up. Pulling away becomes a reflex, not a strategy. It is an attempt to calm the internal chaos that closeness has activated. This does not mean the connection was imagined or exaggerated. In fact, the pullback often happens because the connection mattered more than they expected. The fear response is triggered by emotional significance, not by indifference. This is also where many people misunderstand avoidant behavior as manipulation or breadcrumbing. It can look like mixed signals, inconsistency, or emotional withholding. But in many cases, what is happening is not a game, but a nervous system trying to protect itself. Avoidants who are emotionally attached but unhealed often oscillate between wanting connection and needing distance. They may reach out, then retreat. They may open up, then shut down. They may express care indirectly rather than directly. This does not excuse behavior that causes harm, but it does explain why their actions often do not align with their internal feeling. Understanding this distinction can prevent you from internalizing their withdrawal as a reflection of your worth. Their pullback is about their capacity to tolerate vulnerability, not about your value or desirability. One of the most important clarifications at this stage is recognizing what this behavior is not. It is not necessarily manipulation. It is not always intentional avoidance. And it is not proof that they do not care. Many avoidants genuinely struggle with emotional literacy. They were never taught how to sit with vulnerability safely. They were never shown that emotional closeness could exist without cost. So when love activates their attachment system, they do not know how to integrate it smoothly. Instead of leaning in naturally, they brace themselves, anticipating emotional loss or overwhelm. This anticipation can make them hypervigilant, cautious, and reactive. They may misinterpret their own fear as a sign that something is wrong with the relationship, rather than recognizing it as a sign that the relationship matters deeply. At this point, many people make a critical mistake that unintentionally reinforces the avoidance fear. They respond to withdrawal by chasing, over-explaining, or trying to prove their value. This response comes from understandable pain and confusion, but it often backfires. Chasing increases emotional pressure, which activates the avoidance threat response. Over-explaining can feel overwhelming, especially when the avoidant is already emotionally flooded. Trying to convince someone of your worth places you in a position of emotional imbalance, where you are giving more than you are receiving. This dynamic can deepen the avoidant's fear of engulfment and reinforce their belief that closeness leads to emotional overwhelm. Instead of pulling them closer, it often pushes them further into distance, even if they still feel emotionally attached. What actually creates safety for an avoidant at this stage is not emotional intensity, but emotional steadiness, calm presence, consistency without pressure, boundaries without punishment. When someone maintains their self-respect, emotional balance, and independence, it sends a powerful signal to the avoidance nervous system. It shows that closeness does not require losing oneself. It demonstrates that connection can exist without emotional chaos. This is where secure energy becomes transformative. Secure energy does not chase, withdraw, or demand. It remains grounded. It allows space without disappearing. It expresses needs without emotional volatility. For an avoidant who has learned to associate love with instability, this kind of presence can slowly reshape their understanding of intimacy. Leaning in for an avoidant does not happen because someone proves their devotion. It happens because their nervous system begins to relax in the presence of someone who is emotionally regulated. When they see that you can remain steady even when they struggle, it challenges their core belief that closeness equals danger. This does not mean suppressing your needs or tolerating neglect. It means holding your boundaries while staying emotionally anchored in yourself. The paradox is that the more grounded and self-contained you are, the safer closeness begins to feel to an avoidant. They are drawn to emotional stability because it offers a new template for connection that does not require self-erasure. As this dynamic unfolds, something subtle but powerful begins to shift. The avoidant starts observing you differently. They notice how you handle emotional discomfort. They notice whether you collapse into anxiety or remain centered. They notice whether you respect yourself enough to walk away from inconsistency or whether you tolerate emotional scarcity. These observations matter deeply, even if they are never voiced. Avoidants are highly attuned to emotional energy. Even if they struggle to articulate emotions, they may not consciously analyze these moments, but their nervous system registers them. When they experience someone who can hold space without control, closeness without chaos, and connection without pressure, their internal resistance begins to soften. This does not mean they suddenly become secure or emotionally expressive. Healing attachment patterns takes time and self-awareness, but it does mean that the relationship stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like a possibility. And that shift is profound. It moves the connection out of survival mode and into emotional curiosity. Instead of constantly preparing to retreat, the avoidant may begin exploring what closeness could look like if it did not require losing autonomy. They may still move slowly, they may still struggle, but the fear begins to loosen its grip. Love no longer feels like an emergency to escape from. It starts to feel like something they might be able to approach without losing themselves. At the same time, this stage is also where your power truly becomes visible. Not power over them, but power within yourself. When you stop chasing clarity and start embodying emotional self-trust, the dynamic changes. You are no longer waiting to be chosen. You are choosing yourself while remaining open to connection. This shift is felt deeply by avoidants, even if they do not consciously recognize it. They sense when someone is grounded versus when someone is emotionally dependent. And paradoxically, emotional independence makes connection feel safer, not colder. It removes the pressure that triggers their defenses and allows them to approach intimacy at a pace their nervous system can tolerate. If you are in this space with someone avoidant, it is important to remember that recognizing attachment does not obligate you to stay in a dynamic that does not meet your needs. Understanding their internal struggle does not mean sacrificing your emotional well-being. Love is not proven through endurance of pain, it is proven through mutual effort, growth, and respect. The purpose of understanding avoidant attachment is not to justify emotional unavailability, but to gain clarity so you can make empowered decisions. When you understand what is happening beneath the surface, you stop personalizing withdrawal and start honoring your own emotional standards. The most powerful realization at this stage is that you do not need to force an avoidant to lean in. If attachment has already formed, the work is not about convincing them to love you. It is about maintaining your emotional integrity while allowing space for growth. The moment you stop trying to manage their fear is the moment you regain your balance. And that balance, more than any explanation or reassurance, is what creates the conditions for real intimacy to either deepen naturally or reveal its limits clearly. From this point forward, the dynamic is no longer about trying to figure them out, decode their silence, or wait for a moment where everything suddenly makes sense. This is where the deeper truth settles in, often quietly but powerfully. When an avoidant begins emotionally regulating in your presence, something irreversible has already happened inside them. Their nervous system has learned that safety does not only exist in distance anymore, it has learned that safety can exist near someone else. And this is not a small shift. This is a foundational change in how they experience connection. Emotional safety for an avoidant is not created by intensity or reassurance. It is created by predictability, calm, and the absence of pressure. When they feel that kind of energy around you, their body begins to relax in ways they do not fully understand. They may not call it love. They may not label it at all, but they feel it as a sense of grounding they did not expect to find outside themselves. This is why secure energy changes their nervous system more than any emotional speech ever could. Security does not demand, it does not chase, it does not collapse when faced with distance. It stays steady, and that steadiness sends a signal deeper than words. It tells the avoidant that closeness does not automatically mean danger. As this new emotional pattern settles in, something else begins to happen that often goes unnoticed. The avoidant starts observing themselves differently. They may notice that they are less reactive than they used to be. They may notice that they miss you even when they are trying not. They may notice that pulling away does not bring the same relief it once did. This can feel disorienting. Their old coping strategies no longer work the way they used to, but new ones have not fully formed yet. They are standing between two emotional worlds, one built on independence and self-protection, and one opening toward connection and shared emotional space. This in-between state can feel uncomfortable, even frightening, but it is also where growth begins. It is where attachment wounds are exposed, not to punish them, but to offer a chance for healing if they are willing to face it. This is also where the narrative shifts back to you, because while their internal process matters, your emotional reality matters just as much. If an avoidant has crossed this internal line, the power dynamic has already changed. Whether you realize it or not, you are no longer trying to be seen. You are already felt. You are no longer trying to matter. You already do. The question now is not whether they care, but whether the connection can grow in a way that honors both people. And this is where many viewers finally exhale, because the endless self-questioning begins to soften. You stop asking, "Why am I not enough?" and start asking, "Is this enough for me?" That shift is not cold or dismissive. It is grounded. It is self-respecting, and it is exactly the energy that keeps you emotionally anchored regardless of what the other person chooses to do. When you stop chasing clarity and start embodying emotional clarity, everything becomes simpler. You no longer need to force conversations that feel one-sided. You no longer need to over-explain your feelings in hopes they will understand. You no longer need to tolerate emotional inconsistency just to keep the connection alive. Love does not require self-abandonment to survive. In fact, real love cannot survive self-abandonment at all. And this is one of the most important truths to hold when dealing with avoidant attachment. Their awareness of the bond does not diminish your worth. Their fear does not define your value. Their pace does not determine your standards. The moment you internalize this, your emotional center of gravity returns to you, and from that place you can see the situation clearly without distortion. This clarity does not mean you shut down emotionally or build walls. It means you stay open without losing yourself. It means you can offer connection without chasing it. It means you can hold space without carrying the relationship alone. Avoidants are deeply sensitive to this kind of balance. When they sense that someone is no longer trying to control the outcome, something inside them often softens, pressure fades, fear loosens, and choice becomes possible, not guaranteed, but possible. This is where love stops being a battlefield and starts becoming an invitation they may accept or decline, but one that no longer costs you your peace. It is important to understand that love does not begin with pursuit. It begins with safety. For avoidance, safety is not created through intensity or emotional urgency. It is created through calm consistency, through someone who remains emotionally present without demanding reassurance, through someone who values connection but does not cling to it, through someone who can walk away from emotional scarcity without bitterness or punishment. This kind of presence does not trigger their defenses. It gently challenges them. It shows them a different way of relating that does not require emotional collapse or isolation. And even if they are not ready to fully step into it, the impact lingers. You become a reference point in their emotional memory for what healthy closeness can feel like. At this stage, many people realize something quietly empowering. Whether the avoidant chooses to grow or not, something has already shifted inside you. You are no longer trying to earn love. You are embodying it through self-respect. You are no longer waiting for emotional permission. You are honoring your own emotional truth. This is where the real transformation happens. Not in whether the relationship continues, but in how you relate to yourself within it. When you stop abandoning yourself to maintain connection, you step into a kind of emotional sovereignty that cannot be shaken by someone else's fear. And paradoxically, that is the version of you that feels safest to connect with. If an avoidant has emotionally anchored themselves to you, the power has already shifted. Not in a manipulative way, but in a grounded one. You are no longer chasing their attention. You are holding your own center. You are no longer trying to be chosen. You are choosing alignment, and alignment is something fear cannot sustain forever. It either rises to meet it or fades away. That outcome is not yours to control. What is yours to control is how deeply you honor your emotional needs, your boundaries, and your worth throughout the process. Love, especially with avoidant attachment, is not proven through endurance or sacrifice. It is revealed through emotional honesty and safety. When an avoidant begins regulating their emotions through you instead of away from you, love has already happened internally. What happens next depends on whether both people are willing to meet that truth with awareness, courage, and respect. You do not need to fight for that love. You do not need to convince them of its value. You simply need to remain rooted in yourself. Because the most powerful thing you can offer an avoidant is not pursuit, not pressure, and not perfection. It is emotional steadiness paired with self-respect, and whether they choose to grow into that space or step away from it, you remain whole. Remember this above all else. Their fear is not a measure of your worth. Their hesitation is not a verdict on your value, and their awareness of the bond does not obligate you to shrink yourself to keep it alive. When an avoidant does this one thing, when they emotionally anchor to you in moments of vulnerability, love has already entered the picture. The rest is not about proving anything. It is about choosing peace, choosing clarity, and choosing yourself while staying open to connection that meets you where you stand.